Ever heard of a city that's been a battlefield, a smuggler's paradise, and the birthplace of refrigerated rail cars? Welcome to Ogdensburg, a city perched at the very top of New York, where the Oswegatchie River meets the mighty St. Lawrence, right on the Canadian border. As the only city in St. Lawrence County, Ogdensburg has been a crossroads for centuries, where empires clashed, fortunes were made, and history was written in the northern wilderness. Today, I'm taking you through the remarkable story of how this northern river city came to be. The ancient landscape picture this. Thousands of years ago, this entire area sat beneath a massive glacial lake, Lake Iroquois, stretching far beyond what we know as Lake Ontario today. Then, the Ice Age ended. The glacier holding back all that water, it melted. And in one of nature's most dramatic transformations, billions of gallons came rushing through, carving out what became the St. Lawrence River. As the waters receded, they left behind something precious, rich clay and silt that created some of the most fertile flatlands in North America. And people noticed. Indigenous peoples, the Haudenosaunee, or people of the Longhouse, built thriving communities here. They hunted, fished, and farmed this land. Near what's now Ogdensburg stood Oswegatchie, a village connected by ancient trails that ran north and south through the wilderness. This was their home for generations before any Europeans set foot here. European arrival and Fort La Présentation. Fast forward to the early 1500s. European explorers started poking around, following rivers deep into the continent. Jacques Cartier sailed up what he named the St. Lawrence River, after a Christian saint, naturally. Samuel de Champlain followed, bringing missionaries eager to convert the native population. But the real turning point came in 1749. A French priest named Abbé François Picquet arrived at this strategic spot where the Oswegatchie meets the St. Lawrence. He saw what everyone would eventually see. This was prime real estate for a settlement. Picquet built Fort de la Présentation, or as Americans would later call it, Fort La Présentation. It was part mission, part military outpost. Native families settled nearby. A dam and sawmill went up. Industry was born, but peace wouldn't last. The French and Indian War. By 1754, European rivalries exploded into the French and Indian War, the North American theater of the global 7 Years' War. And Fort La Présentation, it became a staging ground for military operations. In 1756, the French hatched a plan to cut British supply lines reaching Fort Oswego. Their target, Fort Bull, a British outpost near modern-day Rome, New York. Lieutenant Gaspard Joseph Chaussegros de Léry gathered his forces at La Présentation, Canadian militia, French regulars, and native allies. They marched through brutal winter conditions, deep snow and unforgiving wilderness. When they hit Fort Bull, it was fast and fierce, a devastating surprise attack. Mission accomplished, they returned to La Présentation with minimal casualties. But revenge was coming. A few years later, British forces struck back hard. They captured Fort La Présentation and drove the French out for good. Under new management, it became Fort Oswegatchie, the main British post in the northern frontier. The British sealed their control at the Battle of the Thousand Islands the following year, dominating the entire St. Lawrence corridor. The Treaty of Paris brought peace in 1763. But if you think that's the end of the story, revolution was just around the corner. American Revolution and early settlement. In 1777, British General Barry St. Leger launched a campaign from Montreal, sailing right past the Ogdensburg area with Albany in his sights. Spoiler alert, he didn't make it. American forces stopped him cold at Fort Stanwix. Then came the game-changing Patriot victory at Saratoga, the turning point that led to American independence. Here's the thing, though. The British lost the war, but they didn't feel like leaving Ogdensburg. They stuck around for another decade, dragging their feet before finally abandoning the fort. Meanwhile, New York State started selling off northern lands. 10 townships were mapped out to attract settlers to the wilderness. Enter investor Samuel Ogden, who bought a chunk of that land. With help from Nathan Ford, they revived the old fort site and started building a permanent settlement. Pioneer families arrived by boat and trail, carving homesteads out of the northern forest. The Jay Treaty officially fixed the border at the St. Lawrence in 1794, putting the settlement firmly under American control. And just like that, Ogdensburg was born. Growth and the War of 1812. The early 1800s brought rapid growth. Timber, potash, and farming became the backbone of the economy. In 1802, the region organized as St. Lawrence County, with Ogdensburg chosen as the county seat. Shipbuilding took off along the waterfront. Then came the War of 1812. British troops briefly captured Ogdensburg in a cross-border raid, but peace quickly returned. In 1817, the village was officially incorporated, originally spelled with an H at the end, Ogdensburg. A lighthouse went up to guide ships through the treacherous St. Lawrence waters. The village kept growing, and Canton eventually took over as county seat. Some locals even joined the Patriot War in the 1830s, cross-border raids supporting democratic reforms in Canada. Revolutionary spirit was still alive and well. The railroad era and innovation. Then things really kicked into high gear. Ferry service connected Ogdensburg to Ontario towns. The Northern Railroad arrived, linking the village all the way to Boston. Farmers ramped up butter and cheese production. And here's where it gets cool. Locals started lining rail cars with ice, creating one of the earliest refrigerated boxcars. Ogdensburg innovation, baby. Steamboats crowded the harbor. The Marine Railway kept busy repairing and launching vessels. The Rome, Watertown, and Ogdensburg Railroad extended the village's reach even further. By the mid-1800s, Ogdensburg was a major transportation hub. People called it the New York of the North. Public spaces like Mansion House Park, the Free Academy, and several churches shaped community life. And in 1868, after dropping the H from its name, Ogdensburg officially became a city. The Maple City Boom's welcome to the Maple City, to the Maple. A pumping system drew water from the Oswegatchie. Lumbering became king. Street trolleys rattled down St. Lawrence Avenue. Entertainment thrived. Theaters, an opera house, stunning Horwood-stained glass decorating windows throughout the city. At the turn of the 20th century, the State Armory stood as a proud landmark. Dairy farms and factories boomed across the region. Hospitals grew into what's now Claxton Hepburn Medical Center. But there was a dark side. Industrial pollution turned the Oswegatchie into the River of Death. The city had to switch its water source to the St. Lawrence. Meanwhile, women's rights activist Marion Sanger Frank worked tirelessly across northern New York, rallying support for women's suffrage. 20th century. Transformation. By the 1920s, the lighthouse had been raised higher. Prohibition sparked smuggling operations along the border, rum runners making quick cash in the shadows. City Hall replaced the old Opera House. Then came 1940 and the Ogdensburg Agreement, a landmark deal formalizing U.S.-Canada defense cooperation during World War II. After the war, trade exploded, and in 1959 the St. Lawrence Seaway opened. Suddenly, ocean vessels from the Atlantic could reach Ogdensburg directly. It became the only U.S. port on the Seaway. A year later, the Seaway International Bridge provided a direct highway to Ottawa, but over time, the pace slowed. Commercial activity along the river and rail lines gradually eased, and the city settled into a quieter rhythm. Today, Ogdensburg continues to thrive along the St. Lawrence River. It remains the only American city directly on the St. Lawrence, still an important port of commerce connecting two nations. Historic landmarks, outdoor spaces, and a lively downtown attract both locals and visitors who come to experience this unique border city. From glacial lakes to French forts, from revolutionary battlegrounds to refrigerated rail cars, from smuggler's haven to international trade hub, Ogdensburg has lived 1,000 lives. And that's the story of how this northern river city came to be. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.